how did you learn about the clinical trial at the MD Anderson Center?
Okay, so what happened was, I was doing all the bone marrow drives, and the reason they weren't successful is African Americans, blacks had a 1% chance of finding a match. And when I was diagnosed, it was like 2,000 blacks needed a match every year. Maybe 8 of them found a donor, and the rest of them, they didn't have a good outcome. And I would not have had a good outcome had I not been on a clinical trial. And so what happened? I was doing I was living in Michigan, and we moved down to Atlanta, Georgia, where I'm at now. And I was doing a bunch of drives down here, and my wife's aunt was putting on a drive in Columbus, Georgia. So we drove down there, and when I got to the drive, they was told that this gentleman, this businessman, came to the drive. He was looking for me. He saw the promotions that we did on television, and I wasn't there, but he came back, and he said he had hairy cell leukemia. And he had been in a clinical trial. He said he had been near death, and he went out to MD Anderson, and they just turned his leukemia around. He was looking good, lean and mean, and so he gave me the information, and I called, and then I went out to MD Anderson. I talked with the doctor on the phone. He said, "Come on out." And when I arrived in MD Anderson, the doctor said, I'm gonna, increase your dose, whatever you're doing, try different drugs, and then I'm gonna put you on clinical trial after clinical trial. And that's how I started with clinical trials. And around the 3-year mark, I was still at the same place I was at the 1-year mark. And so I asked the doctor, was there anything else that, any other drugs? And he said, well, there's this one drug, but we're having problems in the lab in animals. But if we ever get approval by the FDA to use it, you'll be the first person to use it. And then, his nurse, who was an African-American nurse, said, you just told somebody else that. So they said, okay, you'll be number 2, because you could only put 20 people on it.
Right.
Okay. So it was a very small trial, 20 people in 3 different sites. So I went home, and then about maybe 7 months later, I got a call, and the doctor said, come on out. We got approval to use it in humans. And it started working for me. It did not work for the first guy who was on it at MD Anderson, but it worked for me. And about 10 months later, I was able to run a 26.2 mile marathon in Alaska.
Oh, wow. So you're like, I'm just going to go straight to a marathon. Okay.
Right. Yeah. The Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, they had contacted me because I had to stay out at the MD Anderson for 3 months for the trial. And then I had to keep going back every 90 days for like 3 years. Now, the drug was not approved, until like 3 years after I was doing a lot of stuff by the 3-year mark, but it was not approved at 3 years later. 2 years after the marathon, and I did like a Century 111 mile bike ride up in down in Tucson, Arizona. So I was doing a lot, but it was only because of the clinical trial. And the people who were not on the clinical trial, who did not have access to the drug, they were not doing well.
Wow. So, it's interesting. Like when I was reading your story, like I didn't realize you had participated in multiple clinical trials.
Oh, yes. I had been out there. Oh, well, I started going out to MD Anderson. When I started going out, I kept going like every 2 to 3 months, and they would put me on like a trial for like a month. For example, a PEG interferon. It was not really to extend my life; it was to make my quality of life better, because I had to take a shot every day. So they said, well, we can see if we can get you to take a shot once a week, which, make it easier, less pain. And then, I had to keep this stuff refrigerated. So it was like a ball and chain I had to carry with me all the time. But if I could just do it once a week, it was fine. So I tried that, but, that didn't work either. So drug by drug. But the good thing about that was it kept me in the game long enough to try something new.
Yeah. You had to, if you're only given 3 years to live, and then you're talking about these, it seems like these clinical trials, even though they weren't as effective as the last one.
Yes.
you still it still got you to get to that last one, which was the most effective.
Right. And I knew what the current treatment was, and that wasn't going to cut it. I was not responding to that treatment.
Okay, so I mean, so it seemed like you were really just okay with the whole clinical trials process and getting into it, and just you're adventurous. I mean, because I think some people hear clinical trials and they recoil a little bit.
Yeah. See, the big problem there was I was not asked into the 18-month mark, and as far as being okay with it, I think the number one thing is you have to ask somebody first, and not have like assume, well, he's not going to be compliant, or he's like he's heard about Tuskegee, so I'm not even going to ask him. He's heard about Dr. Sims with the enslaved women. He's heard about with the Henrietta Lacks. He's heard all this stuff, but I can do the calculation myself and say, what are my chances? What are my chances if I take this treatment versus this other treatment? And I can make the decision myself.